All right. Hello, everyone. This is Conversations with Rob. Please listen to our podcast. And also, we are on the radio. And after this broadcast, we will go through some of the radio stations we just got signed into. I have a special guest today, Jess Scarane, who I found out through watching a lot of progressive media and also podcasts that she's done before. So, and I'm, big into Delaware politics through knowing quite a few people there. So, Jess, first of all, thanks so much for coming on and taking some time out of your busy schedule to talk to us tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Rob.
Okay, no worries. We're having a little technical difficulties, but we'll see how this rolls. All right, so Jess, how is the campaign going first and of all?
Yeah, so we kicked off 6 weeks ago and we got off to a super strong start. I think we were, maybe a little worried about that timing because it was right before Thanksgiving and then we were going to run into Christmas and the new year, but people responded really positively and we've had a really strong start. So out of the gate with our first FEC filing deadline that we just hit, we had more than 1,100 individual donations. We raised more than $54,000 in those 6 weeks. And we have more than 75 volunteers who have been out canvassing, knocking doors, making phone calls, texting voters. And we've already knocked more than 2,300 doors. So we've hit the ground running with this campaign, getting our name out there and talking about the issues and the vision that we have for the future.
So looking through your bio and kind of listening to other interviews, as I said, I know that you did Girls Inc., and we'll talk about that in a little bit, working with them and helping girls, tutoring them and stuff like that. But let's talk, first of all, growing up, were you always, or was your family a Democrat? Were they Democrats rather, or were they Republicans, and you kind of grew into that? How did that work out, and how'd you get into politics?
Yeah, that's a great question. I grew up in a relatively apolitical family. Mm-hmm. It wasn't something that we ever really talked about that much. When I was in high school, though, the 2000 election happened, and that was kind of like a political awakening for me. I wasn't old enough to vote in that election, but I remember feeling like this is not the direction that we want to go in. Deep digging into so popular vote counts can be different than electoral college outcomes. Like, what does this mean for the country? So that's when I started first getting engaged politically. Since then, my parents have become a little more conservative than I am, honestly, though they actually have been incredibly supportive of the run that I'm doing in this race, which has been wonderful. But I think most of my worldview has been cultivated by seeing the way the majority of people live and recognizing that a lot of wealth in our country and a lot of power in our country is concentrated and in the hands of the few, when we could have a system that puts that power and that wealth in the hands of the many. And I've just seen the effects of that sort of through every stage of my life since I've sort of looked for it. And that has shaped the values that I have and the belief that, things don't have to be zero-sum games. We don't have to be all fighting over the scraps of the same pie. We could be increasing that size of the pie and making things more equal and more just. And that's the world that I want to see and that I want to fight for.
Right. So, people might say to you, you're a first-time politician running for your first office. Why not run for a small office, a county office? Why go right for the big cojones and run for the U.S. Senate against a guy that I'm not a fan of because he was a Republican, but we'll get into that down the road. But why would you run for the Senate instead of something smaller, county level type of office?
Yeah, well, the problems that I see don't have time for progressive candidates to work their way up the ranks. We are facing so many crises when it comes to wealth inequality, when it comes to climate, when it comes to racial inequality. And I don't think we have the time to have people who are focused on these issues work their way up through the machine. And I think what sometimes happens is if you work your way through that machine, it can kind of break people down. So I am looking at large scale issues that I think affect our entire country and our entire world And I think that those changes have to start at a federal level in our country. And we need more voices like mine and like a lot of progressives that are running for federal office now to change the priorities of our country, because we don't have, 10 plus years to figure these things out. A lot of these things have been going on for decades. The climate crisis has existed my entire life, and the people who have been in power or who have moved through that scheme of working their way up have not done anything about it. So I think it's time that we actually look at people who have different types of experience and not force people to work through the same structure of experience before they get into an office that can actually have a positive effect on some of the things that we need to change.
Right. So last question about, your run, and then we're going to go into some Delaware items. Let's talk about Girls Inc. And I wanted to ask you about that. And as we talked about in the opening, tutored a lot of girls, and you on the board for that, if you still are also. What was the mission of that organization, and what did you do besides like tutoring and that kind of mentoring type of deal?
Yeah, so my experience of tutoring, mentoring was actually for a different organization called the West End Neighborhood House here in Wilmington. So that's focused on providing services to school-age children. But Girls Inc. specifically, that's a national organization in our country, and actually with some chapters in Canada as well. That the mission is to inspire all girls to be strong, smart, and bold. So what that means is that we are trying to cultivate physical health, mental health, self-worth in girls across the country. Make sure that they are set up for success so that they see opportunities for themselves in the future, whether that be going to college, whether that be starting a career immediately, but they have a vision of the future that they want to bring to life. So the way that Girls Inc. delivers that programming is through after-school programs in like centers that we operate, or through in-school programs where we coordinate with the school itself and we bring in our instructors to deliver programming on a regular basis, or through summer camps or weekend programs and things like that. So yeah, I am still on the board there, and the experience of being on that board, and I think many people can say this from being on nonprofit boards, also is where I kind of started to run into government. We receive state funds because we deliver a lot of programming like nonprofits do that the government fails to deliver. So we are filling gaps that the government creates by not having a good support system for its citizens. And a few years ago, the state of Delaware had a very large budget gap. And one of the ways that they wanted to fill that was on the backs of the most vulnerable people in our state by cutting all of what's called grant and aid funding, which is that funding that goes to nonprofits. They wanted to cut every dollar of it. They wanted to cut funding to public schools, and they wanted to cut funding to social services. And that was really what got me to a point where I kind of stopped and I said, even what we have is so fragile, right? Like, we're talking about a quote unquote blue state. We are talking about democratic leadership, and they are still trying to balance the budget on the backs of the most vulnerable people in the state, because those are the people who are not in their ears lobbying them in the direction they want them to go. So that was what really awoke this moment in me of like, we need different representation. We need people who are going to prioritize different things in our government and make sure that our government is actually putting people over profits, over wealthy donors, over corporate power, because that's the change that I actually want to see. And that's the change that I think is going to actually raise the standard of living for every single person in our country. I
agree. And with the sister that has a disability, and we just seen Trump with the SNAP program, food stamps, them doing all that cutting, and they want to keep giving that with the Trump tax scam. He just gave all that money to all the wealthy people, and the companies all did their stock buybacks. Nothing trickles down to the
that's
middle
not a
class.
thing that happens.
Yeah, it's a joke and a scam.
Yeah,
that's why we call it the Trump tax scam.
Exactly.
Anyway, let's move on to Delaware politics. So when people think of Delaware, as you said, it's a blue state. It always votes blue pretty much in presidential elections. You got Sleepy Joe Biden over there. Not a fan. I'm a Bernie guy.
Yeah, me too.
So Sleepy Joe Biden comes around. We've had Tom Kopp, who just won that race against Kerry Evelyn Harris, which I was kind of upset about. And then, you got John Carney is the governor there now. So it's pretty much an establishment Democratic stronghold. You as an up-and-comer and a progressive Democrat, we've seen Bernie has gone all over the country. West Virginia, he won 49 out of 49 counties, conservative Democrats. Talk about the demographics in Delaware and how you will go to, Republican counties such as Sussex County, which is, more of a conservative county than Newcastle, and try to capture these Republican votes across the state and in Sussex County.
Yeah. So a lot of the conversation that I end up having is not really, and you can probably infer this from some of the things I've said already, but it's not really a left versus right conversation that I'm having. Right. I'm not trying to pitch Democrat versus Republican at this point. I'm talking about top versus bottom fights, because we recognize that the bottom has been pitted against each other in the interest of protecting capital interests and wealth that's held at the top. So we're having these fights, across Democrat and Republican lines, while, to your point, everyone who's already powerful and everybody's already wealthy is just lining their pockets further. So when I have conversations with people who are, maybe more conservative, I'm really talking about a vision of a country that has a higher standard of living. And I think in general, when I say, I think everyone should be guaranteed an education and guaranteed clean water and clean air and clean land, and a job and the ability to have a job that pays them a living wage so that they don't have to struggle. These are not really concepts that people disagree with. And I think that's how you have that conversation. If you make a working class and solidarity argument, that is not necessarily pitting people against each other based on, left, right. It's more about how do we band together to fight for things that we all deserve. We live in the wealthiest country in the world. We create that wealth through the work that we do. How do we fight back to make sure we retain more of that wealth? And that's the conversation that I try to have with people and make people recognize that we deserve more than we get.
Right. But in establishment Democrat states such as Delaware, where we just named off all the old white guys that have been in power in Congress, in the Senate, in the governorship, in Delaware, how do you get to the establishment Democrats that are voting for people like Sleepy Joe in the primary, people that are voting for John Carney, and they were voting for these guys for years upon years. And they say, oh, Medicare for all, how are we going to pay for it? College for all, housing for all, how are we going to pay for it? So, they repeat it. And, you said this in an interview, and, you can get more into it, is that with these kind of situations, we're already getting Medicare for all is not free. We're paying into it as taxpayers. So how do you get the message across like that to these people that they're not just, they're establishment Democrats. They're not Republicans. They're, establishment.
Yeah. So there's a couple strategies there. Yeah. One is that there is a base of voters here who are not those voters, who have been completely disengaged, who feel disenfranchised, who probably don't vote consistently, that we are working to engage. And Kerry Evelyn Harris, to your point, started that work. Well, organizers before that even started that work, but her campaign helped build on that work. And that's what we're trying to build on even more. So our base is not necessarily the establishment corporate Democrats. We're building out a base of younger, potentially more minority, potentially feeling more disenfranchised voters, and getting them back into the fold. Because what we've had to this point is a process that has completely excluded those people. You're naming those names. And I had someone come up to me the day after we launched this campaign who was just like, oh, thank God. It's been the same 5 people since I've lived here my whole life, and I'm always hearing the same name. So people are looking for something new. People are looking for something younger and more progressive that's actually going to better their life in a material way. So there is, I'm not denying that there are establishment people here who are entrenched in that worldview, but there are also people who feel really left out by that view. And those are the people that we're trying to engage. My message to the kind of establishment Democrat base is really when we look at the votes that Chris Coons is taking, they're often more conservative than those people would identify. Our leadership votes in a way that is far more conservative than our state is. And that's what part of our strategy is talking about the record and actually making sure that people are aware of the record. Because the amount of people that I have said, either from seeing things he puts on Facebook, Twitter, interviews I've done, conversations I've had, the amount of people who've said, oh, I didn't know that was going on. Oh, I didn't know that he's confirmed more than 80 Trump judges. Oh, I didn't know that he's writing bills that will protect patents and profits of pharmaceutical companies. Like, oh, I didn't know that he's upset that the ACA is being challenged in court, but he confirmed one of the judges that's on that panel that's dismantling it. So when you start exposing the record, people start to realize, like, this person is not making votes that align with my views. And that's part of our strategy. So it's both in engaging new voters and weakening some of the support that people might have, because who has the time to look at every vote? You know, like, people trust you. You said you believe in these things. You said you're fighting for these things. And he says a lot of the right things in the right rooms, but then doesn't always make the right vote. And that's the stuff that we're talking about and the message that we're bringing to the state.
Sorry to interrupt you, Jess. So question is that the primary is September 15th.
Yeah.
College will be in session, University of Delaware, Delaware State, and there's a couple of community college too. I know you'll be targeting those young voters. With those kids, being away in, in August, in July, and, where you're going to be doing canvassing, how do you make sure that you're going to get those kids out on September 15th when they've kindly been probably out of the game or more involved in the presidential race through the summer?
Yeah, well, I think that's through trying to create organizers in the community of those schools. So engaging people to sort of be our canvas captains in those school communities already. Some of the schools that are not UD have more actual Delaware resident students. So those are probably the ones where we want to make sure we're building strength and that we have core constituencies within those schools. UD, we've definitely already made inroads with. We have volunteers already from UD.
Oh, wow. Good.
So, and as well as Wilmington University and Delaware Tech. So we have gotten volunteers who are sort of working as organizers. I think that what we want to make sure is that we are hitting the students who are already residents of Delaware, because it is a little harder to get a student to maybe change from the state that they are originally from. So we're definitely focused more on, like, who already lives here, and then there will be a bit of a push, probably, maybe spring, to say, like, who wants to change their registration to vote here, because they can have a real impact on a really important race at the federal level.
Right. I wanted to get that question in because I thought of that while you were talking about the issues. So you brought up Chris Coons, who, as we talked about earlier on in the interview, was in previous elections a Republican in the past. And as you said, he's voted for Trump nominees. He voted present on Mike Pompeo. He's voted for all these conservative judges that are just kind of flying under the radar in the Senate. And Trump's got over 200 some odd judges approved through his time as president. How do you get this information that you brought up earlier in the interview about all the nonsense that we're talking about that he's doing? He's getting money from the people that are putting the kids in cages. I think he's taken $130,000 from them, about that amount. So how do you get that information out that he really isn't a progressive? He's a guy that goes on CNN all the time and talks about impeachment and other nonsense, but he doesn't talk about any issues when he's on there, and he doesn't do anything for the regular person.
Yeah, or he advocates for war while he's on television, which he's done at least twice with it just since I've launched this campaign. So the last thing we need is more of these endless wars that we've been in for more than half my life. Our effort really is going to be a ground game effort. Like I said, we've already built out, like, canvassing strength. So we're bringing the message to people where they are. We know that we are going to run on a much smaller budget than Chris Coons. To your point, he's got quite a bit of corporate power behind him, corporate dollars behind him. Before we even launched our campaign, I believe he had $3 million in the bank, or at least in receipts. So we know we're not going to outraise him, but I believe that our team can outwork them. And that's really going to be our strategy. We are going to make sure that we get to voters where they are. We're going to host events and town halls where people can, in their community, come and talk and hear the issues. Right now, we're really doing like a listening campaign, right? We're listening to what people are telling us, and we're telling them how the vision that we have for the country will fix the problems that they are encountering right now. And we're going to use our dollars effectively. It's going to be phone calls. It's going to be mail. We're not going to be able to, put on up billboards. And if we up here in the northern part of the state, we're part of the Philly market. So it's an expensive television market. So that probably isn't a tactic for us. We'll see. Maybe our fundraising numbers will totally change. But we're really focused on having these one-to-one conversations with people, because that's where we think that we can actually make real connections, and people are able to ask us questions. And we are prepared to actually speak back to them and speak in their language about the ways that we think that if we all come together, we can fight for a future that's better for all of us, rather than feeling dejected and giving up.
Right. So let's go back to 2018, the Kerry Evelyn Harris race against Tom Copper. There was only, I believe, one debate online through the newspaper over there. Were you challenged, as a quick question, will you challenge Coons to more than one debate?
Yeah, that's absolutely our intention. We have already talked about that on a couple of radio interviews. It's been asked. There have also been, I think, at least 2 local stations here who have said they wanted to host something. So that is absolutely something we think is important, because we think when we are able to put forward our arguments and actually show contrast between us and the Coons vision for the world, it will be really important for people to hear how we differ. Because as I said before, he is really out of step with a lot of the views of our state. We had, he's said things like progressive policies like Medicare for all and the Green New Deal are quote unquote wild-eyed. His vision for how you fix climate change is through carbon taxes, which, yeah, maybe if you did that 30 years ago, we'd be in a better place, but like we are beyond the point where that is going to be effective. And we get limited. There's not a lot of polling that happens in Delaware. We're small, and it doesn't happen a lot here, but it has happened more recently. And more than 60% of people believe that we should be pushing for Medicare for all. More than 60% of people believe that we should be legalizing marijuana. And these are all policies that Chris Coons thinks are just completely off the table. So he's not even representing the views of our Delawareans and our residents here in the state.
And another question about that race, what did you learn from another person that's an establishment guy? And I do believe that Kerry Evelyn Harris won that debate. It seemed like if you watched it on TV. But what do you feel like you learned, from that race with an establishment guy such as Tom Copper, who's been in the Senate for so many years, against a newcomer like Kerry Evelyn Harris?
I think that it gave us, courage to do this. Like we're looking at a campaign that built on the base of Bernie voters from 2016 and added to that base. And, a lot of people try to say like, oh, she only got 35% of the vote. And I'm like, okay, well, that's 15 points from half. So how do we get those next 15 points? Like, it's about building. This is a state where we have not done this very often historically. Like the infrastructure for left challenges or insurgent challenges hasn't really existed for many years. It's literally being built as we run these campaigns. And that's what, in a lot of ways, it's exciting, because we're bringing in new people who are raising their hand and saying, I want to be a part of this. I want the world to be different. So what I take from Kerry's campaign is that there's people out here who believe in this. And that campaign was really kind of hit its stride in the summer. So if we can get that earlier and get in front of more people, how many more votes can we get? And I believe that we can get quite a few more. And I believe that we can actually win this election. I think there are wins along the way, as I said, with like building this grassroots organizing, building this infrastructure. There were things that, volunteers on her campaign brought to my campaign that we were able to have on day 1 rather than day 300, because they had been through it. So we're building out that capacity to do this over and over. And that's what's going to be important, because we have not seen this. People in our state have not been given choice. Chris Coons has this seat because Joe Biden became vice president and said, you run. And there was nobody else who ran. There was no choice given to anyone. So we have intentionally disenfranchised people in that way, because when you give people no choice, they just sit back and, you know, they're not voicing their opinion. They're not given an opportunity to say, I want something different. So this is really new. And I really applaud Kerry for having the courage to do it last year. And there are now so many candidates like myself who are doing it this year. There are 3 other candidates on the state level who are doing primary challenges from the left of existing Democrats in our state house. And what's amazing is we're all going to the door with like a coordinated message. We're talking about the same thing. So people are hearing these things from a lot of different angles now. And what's been amazing just with knocking on the doors here in the last 6 weeks is like people have the language to talk about things like Medicare for all, to talk about a Green New Deal. Like, I don't think that would have been true a year or 2 ago. And I think because of what's been happening in the presidential election and seeing a lot of less establishment candidates rise to the top, it's opened up this conversation. People can say Medicare for all and they know what they're talking about, and you don't have to explain it to them anymore. So I think we are in a much stronger position to challenge establishment because of people just kind of being fed up with the way that things have been going, and seeing candidates who are offering something different succeed.
Right. Have you spoke to any political groups such as Our Revolution, Brand New Congress, any of those groups to maybe get an endorsement?
Yeah, we're definitely working through those things.
Okay, great.
Nothing concrete just yet, but those are the types of groups that we are absolutely reaching out to. We want to be coordinated with groups that are going to be, you know, not just a logo on the website of an endorsement, but those groups that are really going to help build a campaign that have the opportunity to, you know, train people and send people to the state to maybe get some more feet on the ground. So we are looking for relationships like that that actually, again, help us build that capacity, because that's what's going to be so important for us to be able to win.
So now I have a couple of quick questions just for the viewers to know what your opinion is on these subjects. Impeachment. So before I get you fully into it, as a person that watches a lot of progressive media, impeachment is fine, but now you got the Republican base, which is stronger than ever for Trump. You also, I feel like, and I'd love to know what your opinion is on this, they went after Trump for the wrong reasons as far as Ukraine. They should have went after him on the business dealings with Saudi Arabia. There's so much, the tax returns, there's so much to go after Trump, and they go after on the Ukraine thing. What is your take on impeachment, and what is your take on, you know, going after Trump on business dealings where you can get him on taxes, stuff like that, instead of this Ukraine silliness?
Yeah, I share your opinion on that. I mean, I think that the president is clearly corrupt and criminal.
Right.
I think that it's a weird angle to go after him on. And I think it's harder for people to really wrap their heads around, I think, as well. I don't know. I think it could have been stronger if we actually carved away at some of where that support comes from. Because I believe that a lot of the support comes from, like, sure, yeah, maybe he's a criminal or maybe he's a crook, but he's like a crook for me. Mm-hmm. And people believe like are corrupt. Like, people just believe that, right? And that's unfortunate. And they believe that because they've been let down year after year by our government, capitulating and serving a corporate class and a donor class rather than serving the people. So I understand why they believe that. But their support for Trump comes from believing like, okay, yeah, he's doing crooked stuff, but he's doing it for me. And if maybe we instead expose how no, he's not doing it for you. Look, he's enriching himself. He's enriching his own family. Maybe that would be a little stronger and a little easier for people to comprehend. Do I think the president deserves to be impeached? So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Ivanka and Jared made $83 million this past year. So I mean, if you don't call that crooked, then, you know, you're insane. But Why do you think Trump won in 2016? I do see what you're saying with Trump, and I agree with that he told a lot of these people stuff that he was going to do for them. Trump stood up for universal health care. Trump said to end the wars. He's saying the same thing that Bernie Sanders said, and that's why not a lot of Bernie supporters, but a few of them went over to him. But a lot of these conservative people voted for Trump because he was saying all these progressive things. They just were duped because Trump is one of the best reality TV show hosts in American history, and he knows how to do stand-up comedy and get the word out, which is true.
No, he can certainly manipulate media. He is very good at that.
But why do you think he won it?
Yeah, I think that in a lot of ways, he was one of the only candidates who was really talking about the experience that people, certainly an element of people who were like, we heard about like economic despair and all these things. There was certainly that group who he was actually speaking to and saying, we're going to bring back factories, we're going to bring back manufacturing. Again, whether you believe that or not, or whether he's done it, clearly not, but like he was at least talking about it. I also think that there was a real effort on his part to prey on racial animus and a othering that made people feel like there was a reason that their life is the way it is.
Right.
And that reason that he chose was immigrants or, Black people, brown people in our country.
Right.
And I think that while it's true that people's lives are worse than they could be, it is not because of immigration. It is, and instead, what has been done is a story that has been told to people around fighting for the scraps in this kind of created scarcity, rather than looking up at the people above them and saying, actually, why do you have so much? Why are you making us fight each other for the bare minimum? But he played that very well, and he pit people against each other, and it gave someone something to look at and say, like, yeah, that person is my problem.
I agree with you there, but and I'll end this question with this. I believe that Barack Obama was the reason why we got Donald J. Trump, because Barack Obama came in and said he was going to get universal health care. He came with Romney Care and a giveaway to the insurance companies. Barack Obama said he was going to do something with global warming. He did the Paris Climate Accords. It was a good step, but nothing really. So it was the failures of the Obama administration, which Joe Biden is a part of, that didn't get anything done for the people, which Barack Obama campaigned on and won on twice, which I voted for him twice. And he had Organizing for America, didn't use any of the young people to push any of his issues out, and that was the problem. So I blame it on Obama, but that's me. We'll move on to the last couple questions. Your opinion on Joe Biden. I mean, me, and I believe you're a Bernie supporter too. Us as Bernie supporters, we see what Biden did. We look back at the bankruptcy bill. We look at all these financial institutions that have investments in Delaware. He had the pizzeria announcement in Delaware. When he announced, there was no one there. So there was like pretty much no turnout. I mean, we've seen steady, polling for the vice president, but that's because there's a blackout on Bernie Sanders and the media. They're pushing him down. But what is your opinion as somebody that lives in the state of Delaware of Joe Biden, establishment Joe?
Yeah, I mean, he's not my candidate. I think that when he says things to, again, the wealthy donor class, that nothing will inherently change if he's president, that is exactly the opposite of what people like me are looking for. I do think that, home state Delaware, he'll probably do well in the primary here. But I think that when we talk about the base of voters that I'm targeting, none of those voters are going to be Biden voters. I don't think there's a lot of crossover there. I think that we are looking for someone who is going to have a conversation about how our government can actually work for all of us. And that is not the conversation he's having. And you're right. There are things in his record that are terrible for regular people and have hurt people I mean, people can't declare bankruptcy and get rid of their student loans because of Joe Biden. So
war in Iraq.
Yeah,
Killed
and
people.
there are so many things that I think the more Elizabeth Warren voters, the more Bernie Sanders voters, like people who are looking for that progressive lane, are just not going to be in any way excited about a Biden presidency, because he's promising, you know, we'll get rid of Trump, but nothing else will change. And we are, like I said, we are at points of crises on so many things. We need things to change. We need to end wars. We need to fight climate crisis. We need to end emissions. We need to fix wealth inequality. We need to raise our minimum wage. We need to make sure that no one goes bankrupt because they have a freak accident or they get sick. Like, going out with a vision of just like, we'll get rid of this really crass man who's in office is not enough.
Right. What do you hear most from Delaware voters when you're out doing canvassing, listening, as far as issues? I mean, we've talked about Medicare for all, college for all, raising the minimum wage. But what do you hear the most is when you're talking to the regular folks of Delaware?
Yeah, I hear most about healthcare. I hear most about climate change. And I would lump actually economic justice and criminal justice together. Those two things are very intertwined. We have a very high incarceration rate in the state of Delaware. It's actually higher than the average of the country. And if you or your listeners know this, our country is also has the highest incarceration rate in the world. So if we are higher than the country, we are doing worse than the rest of the world. And we have about a 20% Black population in our state, but the population of Black people in prison is 60%. So we have a racially targeted policing and criminal justice system in our state. And what happens is when people are put in jail and then are able to get out and return to society, they are locked out from a lot of economic opportunity. We have horrible civil seizure and asset forfeiture laws in our state, where people lose all of their money, their cars. It's very easy for those things to be taken away. And what happens is that I've had voters literally say to me, they make it so easy to get into the system and almost impossible to get out. So I literally talked to a guy who had just finished 7 years of parole and is working a minimum wage job, trying to keep a roof over his head, trying to raise his kids. And he's like, I am constantly afraid of losing my apartment or losing my house because that will put me back in jail.
What is the minimum wage over there?
We just raised it. I believe it's at $9.25 now, but it's not nearly enough. Yeah. We know that to afford a median one-bedroom apartment in our state, you have to make $18 an hour. So that's to be able to comfortably afford it. So our minimum wage is less than half of what it takes to actually afford an apartment in our state. Yeah. So I support raising minimum wage to at least $15 an hour and pegging it to inflation. We honestly know 15 is not enough, but that's what we've been fighting for. And I think sticking to at least having a coordinated message is important, but that pegging it to inflation is incredibly important. We need to make sure that we don't have to have this fight over and over again. I talk about climate change with people, and it comes up with people because we are the lowest lying state in the country. And we are also an incredibly polluted state. We historically have had a lot of chemical manufacturing in our state, and we also have a lot of chicken processing downstate. And just recently, ongoing right now, a chicken processing plant in Sussex County has poisoned the drinking water in the town. That. Yeah. And people didn't even know until bottled water showed up on their door. And they were told, oh, by the way, don't drink your water. Here's water for you. So we have allowed, I say we, I mean our leadership has allowed our state to be abused by corporations, to be polluted. We have some of the most polluted air and land. And when climate change raises temperatures, air pollution is only going to be more exacerbated. Asthma is going to get worse. When rising sea levels take hold, we're going to lose large portions of our state. We see it already happening when it rains. There's a neighborhood here in Wilmington that's underwater every time it rains. There's downstate, there are roads that get flooded if we have a king tide. It doesn't even have to rain. They just get completely flooded out. So we are already seeing the effects of these things. And to have a senator who thinks that just giving tax breaks to green energy companies is what's going to solve the problem. Like, no, it's not. And it's going to affect indigenous populations and Black and brown populations so much harder, because those are already the neighborhoods that are being affected. And like I mentioned, healthcare comes up all the time. I've said before, people have the language to ask for Medicare for all now. They've started to recognize that even the people who have good insurance have high deductibles now. They all are hard to administer, and there's always an insurance company who's trying to get between your doctor and the prescribed treatment to ration that care that you get. So that comes up at almost every door, at least every canvas. People are saying, like, I have insurance and I can't really afford to use it, or I don't have insurance because the plan that I was offered was so unbelievably unaffordable that it made no sense. Right. We had we only have one insurer in our ACA marketplace.
Wow.
So there's only one, there's a plan options, but only one company option. So that company doesn't have any competition in our marketplace. And rates have risen every year since 2014. And this year, you know, you could see our elected officials touting that rates were down 19%. Well, okay. I went through the process. I said, okay, well, what does someone get if you make $10 an hour? Let's say you need a marketplace plan. The option that was given to that person was $300 a month with an $8,000 deductible. And they could get tax credits to lower that monthly payment, but still, $8,000 deductible. That's a household that makes, you know, $30,000, $40,000. That's almost a quarter of the money that comes into that household that will go to an insurance plan. And the way that they got those rate decreases that they're touting was through a federal government and a state government reinsurance fund. So the federal government and the state government put together a $44 million fund to pay for the highest risk people that would be in the marketplace. So the insurer is not even taking on the highest risk of the people in the marketplace. So the government is already involved in delivering health insurance, but they're just taking our money and providing it to a private company rather than actually providing a service that I believe we deserve.
Right. I 100% agree with you and everything that you just said. So last 4 questions, and these are kind of fun questions. What's your favorite color?
Oh man, red.
All right. Favorite music and musician?
Oh God. Okay. I listen to like a lot of kind of like, I guess you call it indie rock. My favorite musician, I really like this band called American Football.
Okay. That's interesting. I've never heard of them before, but
I'll
check into it. All right. And what is the person you look up to the most?
I don't know her personally, but I've always been inspired by this woman named Cindy Gallup, who was
All right. We're back. We're back. We'll cut that part out because it went off for a little bit. Anyway. All right. So Jess, before we end the interview, last question. What do you believe Bernie's chances are? We've seen the Democratic establishment really black him out. MSNBC, CNN, the media's blacked him out. What do you think his chances are? I mean, we've seen the high fundraising goals that he did this past the 4th quarter with him. I think he raised like $86 million for the year, over 5 million contributions. What do you think the chance? I think he's got a good chance, but I think if the Democratic Party screws him again, then you know, whoever the Democratic candidate is really going to get bombed by Trump.
Yeah, I think Bernie's going to win, but I think we have to make it happen.
Yeah,
and
I believe so too. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jess.
No, I was just going to say, I think we have to be vigilant and pay attention, and I think that we can't just sit back and expect it to happen. We have to get involved in some way. I think that fighting for Bernie and then finding candidates at your local level who are putting forward those same progressive values is so important. I would say to anybody listening to this, like, go knock a door. It's the best experience. Like, it sounds scary, but it's actually really awesome. So go find a campaign that you believe in, and or an issue that you believe in, that people in your community are organizing around. It might be tenants' rights or housing rights. Like, find something that you truly believe in and go out and knock doors for it, because it connects you to more people. You hear people's stories, and this is how we build power among ourselves, like-minded individuals.
And Jess, lastly, where can people find you, and what do you need the most? Obviously donations, but can people like text and call from their homes? How's it work?
Absolutely. So our website is at justfordelaware.com, all spelled out, FOR. When you're there, you can definitely sign up to volunteer. We are set up so that people can make phone calls or text from anywhere in the country. So please sign up to volunteer. If you can make a donation, I welcome it. Your dollar goes further with our campaign. Even a low dollar donation matters to us. Something like $10 means that we can pay to call almost 200 voters. So those things go a long way. So anyone who can donate, I would love it if they did.
All right, Jess. So Jess at justfordelaware.com. And this is Jess, geez, I messed up. Jess Scarane, I'm going to let you say it. I'm sorry. Scarane, right?
Scarane.
Scarane, I'm sorry. I said your name on the Delaware.
You nailed it.
I got to tell you this. I said your name on the Delaware 105.9, and they did some big, a little bit of, what you stand for and stuff. This was like at the 7 o'clock hour, and they botched your name way more than I did.
I know. It's fine. It's happened my whole life.
All right. So, Jess, thanks so much for coming on and spending time with us. I really appreciate it. And we've been talking for quite a while. So, and obviously with the technical difficulties, thanks so much for putting up with that. I appreciate it.
No problem. This was great.
All right. So we cut that out.